From a market perspective, we were trying to introduce a product that was a whole new product category. There wasn't an existing budget line item for wearable voice communication within any hospital budget. So we were not just replacing an existing budget line item, but we were actually having to motivate the creation of a new product category.
Welcome to Stories of the Relentless, turning straw into gold in a world full of no. Powered by the American Heart Association. I'm Lee Shapiro, volunteer chairperson of the board of the American Heart Association.
And I'm Lisa Suennen, managing partner at American Heart Association Ventures.
At the American Heart Association, our mission is to be a relentless force for a world of longer, healthier lives. That means accelerating bold ideas and the bold people behind them, and demonstrating resilience when the challenges seem overwhelming. It's always amazing when people come forward with technology that people think unnecessary because, well, there's a way it's always been done. There was a time, now hard to imagine, when the automated implantable cardiac defibrillator was considered too hard to achieve and also unnecessary since there was an external way to shock the heart. Dr. Morton Maurer, a longtime volunteer with the American Heart Association and namesake of the Maurer Fellowship, didn't let the naysayers stop him. Together with his collaborator, Dr. Michael Morawski, Dr. Maurer overcame the doubt and pushback from industry, even the loss of a major licensing deal with a market-leading company that could have killed the project. Together, they launched the first implantable defibrillator in 1980, catalyzing major change for patients and changing the technology landscape of the cardiovascular industry.
Today we're speaking with Brent Lang, founder and CEO of Vocera. He knows a fair amount about being in the right place at the right time, even when others don't see it, and not letting the competitive pressure get in the way of success. Today, Brent is a widely respected advisor and board member of several highly successful healthcare companies. Along the way, he worked his way up from an early business leadership role at Vocera, which he joined shortly after its earliest founding in 2000, and he became CEO in 2012. He also worked his way up from the kiddie pool to become an Olympic gold medalist in the 4x100 freestyle relay at the Seoul Summer Olympics in 1988. The Olympic torch hangs on the wall prominently behind him. He carried it during the Olympic torch relay in Portland for the 1996 Atlanta Games. It's an inspirational visual that speaks to his resilience, determination, and training. Brent, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
This podcast is focused on standout healthcare leaders like you, Brent, who have made a relentless commitment to success and a meaningful contribution to our field. Your relentlessness seems like it was always part of your being, even before you came to healthcare. I read that your family moved to England, and as an 11-year-old, you failed to make the soccer team. And you had no way to play your favorite American sport, so you took up swimming. And that seems to have gone pretty well. What drove you to compete, and how did you find the relentless will to overcome barriers to the familiar at that age?
Well, I think competitiveness is something you're born with. I think I was hyper competitive from a very, very early stage of my life. I remember recently looking at some old family videos of me and my brother. My brother was 18 months older than me. And before I could even walk, I was looking at him and trying to compete with him and watching what he was doing and trying to do a better job of it. So maybe it's just a younger brother syndrome or something that drives it. But I've always been very, very competitive. I think that some of the early childhood experiences that we had really tested my resilience and forced me to grow both mentally and physically. When we moved to Guernsey, it was somewhat of a traumatic idea in my head, moving to a little island in the middle of the English Channel that I'd never heard of before. But getting there and experiencing that opportunity really broadened my mind and convinced me that I could overcome challenges that seemed insurmountable when you were first faced. So that the idea of going to school 6 days a week and wearing a tie to school and having to take Latin and German and French when I'd never taken a foreign language before, all these are challenges that forced me to sort of stretch outside my comfort zone, but gave me an opportunity to really prove to myself that I can learn new things. And the island of Guernsey had a swimming program that my brother and I both participated in very actively. We made great friendships there, and I saw some early success in a sport that was universal. Whereas cricket was not something I knew anything about. At least swimming was something that we could all do. The other thing I would point to is the support that I got from my parents and other family members and friends. There's something about the importance of unconditional love when you're trying to be competitive. And both my parents were always very supportive of me. That their love and support of me had nothing to do with whether I won or lost a race, or how I did on a final exam. And that gave me the opportunity to put that competitive pressure on myself as opposed to having it come from an external source. And I think that's critical as we let kids grow up and develop that capabilities. You learn very quickly as an athlete or as a student or as a business leader that the only thing you really can control are your efforts and your attitude. And getting that mindset right in an early stage of my life has really helped me throughout the rest of my career.
Despite that, I'm sure you must have had some setbacks on the swimming front, and then you joined the U.S. Gymnastics Committee at a time when they were going through some pretty tough challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you drew from that?
Yeah, it's interesting. As an athlete, you are primarily focused on your own performance and the things within your control. You have a lot of impact in terms of, as I said, effort and attitude and your training and how you approach races. And I think the important thing I learned as an athlete is that things are never as good as they seem, and there's never as bad as they seem. You're going to have ups and downs throughout your career. I always like the phrase "life is a marathon, not a sprint." And even though I was a sprint freestyler, I always tried to remember that you're going to have these ups and downs, but you have the ability to control those things yourself as an athlete in the way you train and the way you prepare. Transitioning to running organizations, and you mentioned, say gymnastics, the board there, and even the companies that I've been associated with, you realize that success is really much more about building culture and building trust within the organization. It's not about your own individual performance. It's about bringing people together. It's the ability to have the patience to see through to the results, because oftentimes when you're talking about transforming organizations, it takes a tremendous amount of time, not only to make those changes, but then to have those changes be recognized by the media, the constituents, your membership, your customers. And it can be very frustrating to feel like you've made all this progress, and yet the external world hasn't necessarily recognized that or given you credit for that yet. And so I think changing from kind of an individual more mindset to a team-based mindset, and thinking about how that team can create change in an organization and then communicate that change to the external world was a big transition for me, and one that took me some time to really get comfortable with as I grew out of my hyper-competitive athlete phase into my sort of team building phases of a leader of organizations.
Speaking of building, I remember when Vocera was founded back in 2000, and being a Star Trek fan, you were bringing the communicator to life. It's a next generation communication device used in hospitals, and today is a standard. But the product, as I recall, really didn't take off for a while. It probably took 7 years or so to get to 100,000 users, and then the company went public in 2012, and as I recall, it was about 500,000 users then. So significant growth, but yet, as we like to say, it was a 7-year overnight success, right? What was the inflection point, and what had to happen for Vocera to become the leader and adopted as it is today?
Yes, I like to joke that if I knew now, or if I knew then what I know now, I'm not sure we would have even embarked on the journey. It was it was a lot harder than
Said
I think
every
people.
startup entrepreneur ever.
I think we were facing both tremendous market and technology risk. From a market perspective, we were trying to introduce a product that was a whole new product category. There wasn't an existing budget line item for wearable voice communication within any hospital budget anywhere in the world. So we were not just replacing an existing budget line item, but we were actually having to motivate the creation of a new product category, which is always a lot harder than just doing faster, better, cheaper with an existing category. And then on the technology side, we were really bringing together 3 bleeding edge technologies. We were using speech recognition. Think about 2001. This was pre-Siri. This is pre-Alexa. Speech recognition was just in its early phases, and the product relied exclusively on speech recognition as the user interface. You had no backup or alternative, and so we had to overcome that. We were using the Wi-Fi infrastructure, which of course today Wi-Fi is ubiquitous. Everyone takes it for granted. But in 2001, 2002 timeframe, Wi-Fi was just getting started. It was certainly not pervasive in a lot of the customer environments we were going into. So we were not only having to fight through the early technology challenges of it, but we were having to fight the adoption of needing that Wi-Fi infrastructure in order to be successful. And then we were also using voice over IP. Most enterprise phones today use voice over IP or internet protocol. In those days, it was kind of unheard of to be trying to use a real-time data application like voice over a Wi-Fi network. And so those technical challenges made it really quite difficult to create the product and to get customers comfortable with what the product was doing and how it was going to work. And so it really came down to identifying what was going to be a pain point that was significant enough that customers were willing to take both that market risk and technology risk for us. And you may remember that Vocera started out not as a healthcare company. The founder's original vision was to sell this into Fortune 1000 company environments, into security, help desk, IT, facilities, any kind of mobile workers within Fortune 1000. And I remember my first job at Vocera was as the VP of marketing, going around and doing all these interviews with customers in different market segments. And I got a lot of, that's a really cool technology. I didn't get a lot of, I want to write you a purchase order for what you're doing. And it wasn't until we showed up in a hospital and started talking to some nurses who identified for us the tremendous pain point that we could solve of having to eliminate all of the hassle of leaving the patient's bedside, going to the nurse's station to use either overhead paging or an alphanumeric pager to reach the person that they needed. And you could see it in their eyes. You could see it in their tone of voice that we had stumbled upon a pain point that was massive for them. And one of the nurses literally said, "You are going to change the way nursing is practiced around the world." And at the time she said it, I didn't really even know what she was talking about because I did not come from a healthcare background. I didn't have a deep understanding of the clinical workflows. But I can tell you that once I heard that phrase, I knew that we needed to stick around and wait to hear what she had to say and understand the clinical workflows and the problems that we were solving. And I guess my big takeaway from that was, if you find a big enough problem, the big enough passion point for a customer, they're willing to stumble along with you as you work through some of the technology challenges or the market challenges or budget challenges in order to get there.
Was there an aha moment for you? I mean, why don't we make it even harder? Sell to healthcare and to the nurses who have no authority to make decisions. I mean, it just seems like such a challenging road to go. What was the big breakthrough for you that opened up the market there?
I think it was two things. The first thing was recognition that this was not just about technology. This was about change management. We were fundamentally asking nurses to change their behavior and how they delivered care. And there's nothing more difficult than changing people's behaviors.
Yeah.
So I think really internalizing that mindset and thinking about what we were going to do from a training perspective, from an implementation perspective, from an onboarding and continuing to support our customers to help them through that change management piece was a big part of it. And then I think the second thing that really helped accelerate the business kind of in that mid to later stage of the company was recognizing that the clinical workflow wasn't just about voice, it was about voice and data. This was a company that had been founded on the premise of real-time voice communication, wearable voice communication, as you said, the Star Trek communicator badge. But as clinical workflows evolved in the 2009, 2010 timeframe, where all these clinical systems started coming into the patient's ring, whether it be patient monitors or the electronic medical record or bed monitors, or there was just dozens and dozens of clinical systems that were collecting data about the patient. And the workflow changed from an environment where a nurse was identifying a change in the patient's condition and just needing to reach other clinical staff in order to address that need, to an environment where the expert systems were really recognizing the change in the patient's condition even before a nurse was recognizing it. And our job was then to distribute those alerts and alarms to the appropriate caregiver. So we were able to use a lot of the same underlying technology in terms of routing the right information to the right person, but the source of the data was now data from these expert systems rather than just person-to-person voice communication. And we were really one of the first companies to integrate the voice and data components together into the clinical workflow. And I think that really helped us accelerate the adoption of the solution.
Brent, when you think about and you've focused on the customer, the end user here, and talking about nurses and then integrating into clinical workflow, but this idea of technology coming into healthcare was not only challenging from a change management standpoint for the end user, but probably also for the market as well. Like there were probably a number of people who didn't believe that this was something that could be used in that framework. And I'm curious, what was it about staying with the mission and how did you continue on when maybe there were naysayers, not only the providers who were challenging you, but maybe also the investor community?
Yeah, it's a great question, and ironically, as I said, we didn't start as a healthcare company. I was not particularly passionate about healthcare when I got into the business. I viewed myself as more of a technologist. I'd come from kind of a networking space. But once you get into it and once you start to see the impact on the patients' lives and on the nurses' lives, it's contagious. And it became a cornerstone of who we were as an organization. I remember during our all hands meetings, we talked about the impact we were having on patients and family members and on nurses at the beginning of every single meeting. And even when the financials weren't where we wanted them to be, or maybe our quarterly results hadn't been where we wanted them to be, there was always a silver lining with some success story with a customer where the impact that we've had on them had saved a life or had transformed the care process or had reduced the stress level on the nurses. And over time, that became more and more central to who we were as an organization. We grew into being a healthcare company, and the passion for healthcare grew within all of us, myself included. And it changed the culture of the organization, and our reason for being became all about saving steps, saving time, saving lives for our customers and ultimately for patients.
It's so interesting because I know the company was ultimately sold to Stryker, which is known for being a medical device company, not a digital company, not a communications company, all of those things. And you're also involved in a couple of other companies as a board member, Outset Medical, which is sort of a combination company as well, EcoHealth, another combination company, tech and device, and very paradigm changing concepts, very convergence oriented concepts from different parts of the healthcare industry. How do companies like this, you know, convince the world that that's an okay convergence or make that change? And what kind of skills do people like you as entrepreneurs or others need to survive in that whole convergence world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the mistakes that people make is that they think if they can demonstrate a positive ROI, that that's enough to be successful. And what we learn and what I'm learning with the boards that I'm on now is that ROI alone doesn't make the sale. Most hospital administrators, whether you're a CIO or a CMO, they've got a stack of positive ROI technologies and solutions and products that have been pitched to them. And they just don't have the bandwidth to even implement or consider all of the quote positive ROI projects. What really moves the needle is the clinical impact. Can you demonstrate clinical impact on patients and clinical outcomes? And if you can combine that with a positive ROI, then you start to get prioritized within the organizations. Hospitals have become much more sophisticated buyers, and the decision making has become more centralized. Many of the hospitals have moved their budget dollars from individual departments into centralized committees that are made up of the C-suite. When we first started selling Vocera, we could make a sale to the head of the emergency department or the head of the OR, or even a nurse manager for a nursing department. They had enough budget that they could get started, and we use kind of a land and expand approach. That's not really the case anymore. Those budgets have now been centralized at the hospital level or even the health system level as organizations try to drive more standardization. And once it becomes an enterprise sale for the health system overall, now you have to start driving impact that aligns with the strategic objectives of the organization overall. And that usually is clinical outcomes as well as financial outcomes. And I think that a lot of technology companies lose sight of that. They get focused on the bells and whistles of the technology or the impact that the technology can have, and they forget about the need to tying it back specifically to clinical outcomes and also the work required for that change management portion that I spoke about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Lisa mentioned your boards at Outset and Echo Health. I also saw you're on the board of Halcyon House, which is focused on social entrepreneurship. And I'm curious about how you think about mission in work, and also think about what it is that you're teaching and mentoring entrepreneurs about, resilience and other traits. Can you share a little bit more with us about what you're doing there?
Yeah, I think it starts with recognizing that my own success was on the backs of many, many mentors and coaches and teachers. And, I've reached a stage in my career where I have a strong desire to want to give back. Somebody said to me the other day, the phases of life are, learn, earn, return. And I thought that was super clever.
I like that.
Yeah, so I guess I'm entering the return phase of my life. And Halcyon is as you mentioned, it's a social venture incubator focused on trying to bring venture dollars and support to entrepreneurs that might not otherwise get that support. They're very focused on women entrepreneurs and people of color who oftentimes are not exposed to the venture community, but have got ideas that are focused on either health outcomes or climate tech outcomes or equity tech. And it was an opportunity for me to give back and mentor them. One of the things I realized when I moved away from being a full-time CEO is the part of my job that I loved the most was coaching and mentoring my employees, my staff and my employees. I didn't miss the earnings calls, to be honest with you. But I did miss the coaching and mentoring. And so these incubators like Halcyon give me an opportunity to share some of the lessons that I learned many times the hard way with entrepreneurs who are going through many of the same challenges. I initially tried to create a whole set of OKRs for myself when I left Vocera, and it was way too detailed and way too specific. And I eventually threw it all out and tried to summarize kind of my personal mission statement into really three concepts: living a life with passion, sort of following my passions on a daily basis, trying to explore the world with a sense of curiosity, learning, being open to new concepts, and leading with empathy. And I think the empathy side ties back into some of these social venture incubators, because you really realize the desire that these people have in most cases to create businesses that are tied to a personal life experience that they may have had themselves or with a family member. And they're really trying to use products and technologies that can make a direct impact on the world. So it's been a lot of fun for me, and I really enjoy mentoring young leaders who are sort of going through the same learning process that I went through earlier in my career.
We're going to come to a close pretty quickly here, but I have a few lightning round questions for you. So, Brett, what's the first thing that comes to mind when I ask? What's the sacred belief, quote unquote, that you had early in your career that you were absolutely sure of and found out was wrong?
Well, I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I think earlier in my career, I had a mindset that if I wanted something done right, I needed to do it myself. And that the best way to get the best outcome was just to take control of the pen, so to speak. And what I learned in my career that it actually changed that is that it's really about surrounding yourself with people that are smarter than you, that are better than you, or that are more capable than you in a variety of different areas. And building that team can actually deliver much better outcomes than trying to do it myself. And that was a hard lesson to learn for someone who was an athlete and someone who, would like to be in control of the situation, to realize that I needed to be more inclusive. And it was all about the success of bringing the right people together in an environment where they could build upon each other's strengths was really, really valuable and important.
And lastly, how did you define success early on, and how has that changed over the years? How would you define it now?
In my business life, I think early on, I may have slipped into, or even my academic life, the mindset that um, being right was the most important thing. And I think shifting from that to sort of being right to being effective and realizing there's a difference between being right and being effective was a really important part of that. For me, leadership starts with listening. And I think we do a disservice to rising business leaders when we promote the idea of leadership that it's Steve Jobs standing on the stage giving an amazing speech, talking about a new product in a dazzling way. And that's certainly a part of leadership. But what I found is really good leadership starts with listening to your customers, with listening to your employees, listening to your environments before you're the one that's talking. And this quiet leadership is something that I really embraced and now has become the most important part of my leadership.
That's great. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we thank you again for your time today?
No, this has been great. It's funny. I was reflecting upon my life recently and a celebration of life for my mom. And one of the comments that people kept talking about at that celebration was how positive she was as a person. And I think that really was probably the thing that I inherited from her more than anything. I just can't say enough about the importance of having a positive attitude and keeping your head up and your arms open to new opportunities. You just never know how something you're learning or something you're encountering might help you in the future. And I think if you look at it from the perspective of every challenge is really an opportunity and everything that comes into your life is potentially an opportunity for something great, is just a very productive way to live life. And it's certainly been a cornerstone of both my academic and athletic career, as well as my business career and my work with my family. And so I guess my one piece of advice for everyone would be just to stay positive.
Or to listen to your mom?
That's true. That's a good one too.
Thanks so much, Brent. It's been great chatting with you today.
My pleasure.
What an extraordinary conversation with Brent Lang. You heard him say he leads from a place of listening. Head up, arms open, be open to new and interesting opportunities. And I also took away from the conversation about the three key points that he kind of learned throughout his career about kind of waking up every day with a passion for what it is you're going to do. Be open to what might come your way and explore kind of a lifelong curiosity. And finally, empathy. So important in terms of understanding what it is that you're trying to do and hearing from other people, the importance of the conversations that he was having with nurses and doctors about bringing Vocera to market was critical to their success. So quite an impressive interview.
Yeah, I really liked his comment about learn, earn, and return. Feels like very much a path that several of us have followed, I think, Lee. And it's great to have a conversation with somebody who believes that is important.
Well, this was terrific. And please follow the American Heart Association on LinkedIn and YouTube for more conversations like this one. And you can download this episode and the full series of Stories of the Relentless wherever you get your podcasts.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to it, share it with your network, and leave us a review. It helps amplify these stories and the mission behind them. Thank you very much from the American Heart Association.